Hey guys, so this is a video I've been wanting to do for a long time. This is going to be just kind of an overview of some of the basic principles of synthesizers and how they work, what these knobs do, and what we can make with them. And I've got my trusty Sub Fatty here. This is actually a pretty basic synth, believe it or not. And this can give us a good overview on stuff before we get to the big boys over there. We want to know what we're doing. All right, so I'm actually going to start today with the mixer section. And what we're going to find here is a bunch of oscillators. You can see this OSC is short for oscillator. An oscillator is just something that makes the sound. You'll see in a second here. So we have 4 distinct sources here. Oscillator 1 is going to sound like this. It's kind of a thin sound. And then you can see how it's connected here, but I have what's called a sub-oscillator. It's the same sound at a very low octave. So as I turn that up, it's gonna put more bass into the sound, make it a little thicker. That's just the sub oscillator. Yep. And so that's what that guy's gonna sound like. Generally, you want to keep it a little bit back and have your main oscillator most prominent. Dial back a little more. But it will help to thicken out your sound, and if you're doing a bass sound, that will really bring that together too. All right, cool. I'm going to take that out. And then we have the sound of oscillator 2. Now this is not linked. This is totally independent, so I can tune it wherever I want. I actually have it tuned up a fifth right now. And then so if I bring the oscillator 1 back in, you'll hear an interval of the fifth. So each key that's playing a G and a D in there, and that D will be more prominent the more I turn up oscillator 2. So without it, that's the interval in there. Cool. So tuning those to different intervals can be a cool way to kind of get some crazier sounds. Or if you tune it to the same interval, it's a good way to thicken up your sound. And then lastly here we have a noise generator. I tend not to use this for melodic stuff, but if that's what it sounds like. It's cool if you're trying to make percussive sounds or like a snare drum sound out of this stuff, or to add a little bit of dirt into your patches. But for now, I'm going to leave that off, and I'll go back to oscillator 1 only up here. Very good. So with that sound, I have a little bit of control. If I come over here to this section, the oscillators section, I have a separate column for 1 and 2. And then the first thing I can control is which octave it's in. Right now, these are actually named after organ pipe lengths. So 16 is the longest, therefore the lowest. This will be an octave up, 8 feet, 4 feet, 2 feet. So again, depending on what your purposes are, you would select, I'm going to keep it in the middle sort of for that. And then down here, we've got the wave control. So you can see, sorry, I'm trying to stay out of the light, but this is what we call a triangle waveform. This is actually the literal shape of the sound wave. So when I play that, you can hear it's very smooth, not very biting at all. As I increase it to what's called a sawtooth, you can hear it start to get a little brassier, a little more in your face. And then over here, I increase it to a square wave. And then between here and here, I have what's known as pulse width modulation. You see like this has tighter squares. And that can get some interesting sounds just kind of going back and forth between those settings. So let's actually leave it at a sawtooth wave for now. Very good. And then you notice I have the same controls for oscillator 2. So here I can let's bring oscillator 2 back into the fold. All right. Okay, but here you'll notice there's an additional control for frequency. So what this is the number of half steps away from oscillator 1. So if I put it in the middle, it's going to be the same sound. Right? A little out of place there, but I can get it in, there we go. Right, so if I moved it up to +1, that is not going to sound very good because it's going to be a half step away. Gross, right? But I can get it to a whole step, or a third, all the way up to the fifth. I can also go the other way to go below it. That'd be a fifth below. So essentially, just with this G, I'm also playing C and G at the same time. Cool. But remember, your sub oscillator is still going to be on the original frequency. So if you want to dial it back, you can have get some interesting results just kind of playing around with the mix of those two oscillators. And then of course we can change the waveform here too if I want it to be more mellow, or if I want it to be more aggressive. Cool. All right, now you can imagine it's probably pretty useful a lot of times to have it be tuned to the same note. That's how we get the thickest sound. But rather than having to like fiddle and get all that stuff exactly in the middle, that's what this button is for. It's called Hard Sync Oscillator 2. And what that does is just automatically pitch it to where it's going to be the same tone as Oscillator 1. Now, if I try to cheat it here and still push it up a fifth, you'll hear what happens. You can get, it kind of fights the... kind of cool, almost distortion there. Let me turn that up a little bit. Great. So again, depending on how you mix it, how prominent you want that to be, you can get a nice kind of sweeping bite from changing the tuning of oscillator 2. Cool. So just with those two and a little bit of sub oscillator, you can get a pretty thick sound. Right now it's pretty up in our face. So now let's go over to the filter section. You notice this knob is bigger than the other guys. This is called the cutoff frequency knob. And this guy is going to roll off the sounds. It's what's called a low pass filter. So when it's very high up here, we're going to hear the entire sound, right? As I move it down, we're going to start to hear some of the frequencies roll off. All the way down to nothing, all right? Classic sound. Again, the Moog filter is like a famous one. So we can definitely hear that. But we have another control and connection with that. It's what's called resonance. And they kind of try to show you here, but it's the higher the resonance is, the more extreme the movement of the cutoff filter is going to be. So if I have it pretty high up there, we'll really hear those sweeps pretty severely, all the way to the point where we can actually get another tone out of it. But if we keep it in the middle, this is where it generally tends to go, just gives us a nice kind of control over that sort of thing. Cool. So that's generally what the filter does. All right, and then these other guys I'm going to get to in a little bit here. Multi-drive is basically just a distortion. They just threw it on there. So if you want your sound a little gnarlier, just crank that puppy. Yeah, does what it does. This works better if the filter's open. Kind of fun. Yeah, just add a little bite to your stuff. Okay, good. So up to now, I've been kind of turning all these knobs at the same time I'm playing it. But obviously, it would be really nice to be able to play and have those knobs kind of turn themselves. So this is a huge part of synthesizers. This is basically what comes under the heading of modulation. You can see I have a whole section here. Most synthesizers will. So the most common source for modulation on a synthesizer is going to be what's called an LFO. It stands for low frequency oscillator. So we've heard oscillator before. Remember, that's what's making the sound. It's moving in different directions. these guys move crazy fast when they're doing their thing. A low frequency oscillator moves slower. It's what we call a control signal. So we don't hear an LFO. Instead, what we do is we use it to twist these knobs for us, basically. So let's get it going. We actually have some choices for what kind of shape we want our LFO to take. We have a triangle, which will go up and down. Let's start with that. And you see the light comes on and shows us what the speed is. And I can speed that up or slow it down. That's very slow. This it'll start to speed up. And it'll get fast, actually so fast to where you can kind of start to hear it, but that's the thing. All right, so let's set it in the middle there. And then currently if I play, nothing's gonna happen there, but I have some options here. I can send it to control the pitch. So if I wanted a vibrato, I would change the amount that this would change it, and I'm still not gonna hear anything, right? But what I need to do is down here, I have my mod wheel, and the more this is pushed up, the more this is gonna be affected, up to the point where I have this listed. So right now it would change it by 2 or a whole step. Check it out. So I'll play the G, right? But as I add modulation, right? So you can hear the LFO kind of changing the pitch in that triangle pattern, up, down, in an increment of 2. Now we can make it more extreme. You know, if I push it all the way up here, you know, fun, but not all that useful, to be honest. In certain cases, you know, but for the most part, the most common use of this is to make what's called vibrato. So emulate kind of how a string player would play or a violin. So generally what's done is you would set the pitch amount very, very little, right? Just to waver it a little bit. You want a pretty fast LFO for it there. Now let's give it a little more. Do you hear that? So if I'm playing along, it's nice to I'm doing one-handed, left-handed playing because I'm holding the phone, but that's the idea, is you kind of add vibrato to certain notes that you want to emphasize, and it's a very nice effect. It's a good thing. You can leave it up, have it for the whole thing, you know. But that's essentially an LFO routed to the pitch amount is this sort of thing. All right, good. So we got some other options here too. We can have a controller filter. So remember, this big knob is a real popular one to turn. Same deal. We can have our filter ride this LFO. So if I crank it up there, right? So it's still shaking that up and down pattern, but this time it's not the pitch that's being controlled. It's this, letting the frequencies in and out in that wave. So you'll hear a constant pitch, but different parts of it are being emphasized. Remember, we can change the speed of our LFO too. So this is really fun with a low, slow LFO. So I get these wide sweeps of sound, just kind of super fun stuff. The other thing we can do is change our wave amount. So again, I've got kind of a mellow sawtooth wave going on here, a little bit brassy, but same deal. If I change this to ride the LFO, that is going to come up and down. Let's take the filter out, so we'll only hear the wave modulation. Cool. And again, there's other ways to use it, but that is the basic effect that we would get. All right, cool.